I'm Janine. This is Caitlin. Mitsu is somewhere. We're talking about murder. We're lady killers.
Is that an intro? No. No.
What is an intro?
We're fancy people, show people.
We're talking about murder again today.
And she already knows who we're talking about because I got to go to one of his houses. This is famous British serial killer, Dennis Nilsen.
Yay!
By the way, one of my best references in this was last podcast on the left, who I just keep stealing information from.
She just jumped up on the couch and then quickly fell off. Are you okay? Hi. Hi, baby. It's okay. Come here. What's going on? Oh, this is Mitsuha. So, yeah.
Anyway, so he's a little weird-looking guy. This is a long-ass topic, and I will barely be skimming the surface. It is a lot to get through, and I'm just going to skim because if you want to research it, do it. A lot of the information also comes from an unpublished autobiography that Dennis Nilsen wrote called History of a Drowning Boy.
Oh.
It was never published, but a lot of people have information about like what he wrote in it. Mm-hmm. And he's also referred to as the Muswell Hill murderer and the kindly killer.
Why? How can he be a
Muswell Hill is where he was from. Kindly killer, I think, because he's very like, he would like hang out with them after they were dead. He's a necrophile. It's important to note, even though he has some issues with that term.
Okay.
Let's get through his childhood. Dennis Andrew Nilsen was born on November 23rd, 1945. Nilsen actually recently died, which I think is relevant this year. He died at the age of 72 at York Hospital while he was still incarcerated. He died on May 12th, 2018. So
that was very recent.
Yeah, he died of a blood clot. Mm-hmm. Spoiler alert, he does get convicted. Dennis was the second of 3 children born to Elizabeth Duthie Wicht and Olav Magnus Moksheim, who had adopted the name Nilsen.
It's all this, and then Nilsen.
Nilsen. Olav was a Norwegian soldier who traveled to Scotland in 1940 as part of the Free Norwegian Forces following the Nazi occupation of Norway. So his parents had like this really tumultuous marriage. In fact, like after the 3rd child was born, which is, so it's Olav Jr., Dennis, and Olaf Jr. Dennis. And Sylvia.
And Olaf and Sylvia. Dennis.
Dennis. Okay. The one really meant for something special.
Dennis, he knew then.
Dennis. So Olaf was really focused on the Norwegian forces, and he had little time for his wife or children. His wife actually said that she rushed into marriage without thinking, and the pair divorced in 1948. Nilsen was known as a quiet and adventurous child. He liked to meander around the Scottish countryside and to go on family picnics. He was very, very close to his maternal grandfather, Andrew Wicht, which is an apparently incredibly relevant aspect of Nilsen's life, seeing as his title of his autobiography references his drowning and also the fact that his grandfather worked at sea all the time and died at sea.
Yikes, okay.
Yeah, his grandfather was a fisherman. So he referred to his grandfather as his great hero and protector, and that while his grandfather was at sea, his life would be empty until he returned. So he clearly can have connections with people. That's actually kind of an important thing to remember about Dennis Nilsen, is he clearly is able to have strong connections with other people. So again, as I said, 1951, the grandfather died while at sea. He suffered of a heart attack on October 31st, 1951. So his body was brought ashore and returned to the family for burial. Nilsen would creepy stare at the grandfather when he was in the casket, and his mother simply told him his grandfather was sleeping. And Nilsen became increasingly reserved following his grandfather's death. Some people believe that Nilsen maybe made a weird correlation between love and death at this point, because he becomes like a necrophile. And there seems to be this switch moment here, but it's also he might just be attracted to dead bodies.
Right.
I don't know what to tell you there.
But I mean, that would make sense. That's a traumatic event. And how old was he whenever that happened?
It was 1951. He was born in 45, so he was 6.
I mean, I can maybe he at that point like had some kind of obsession with death or something like that.
I think he didn't know what death was quite then.
Okay.
That I think he was like, my grandfather is my only friend and he's just sleeping.
Right, okay.
Like, I think he had this weird vision of what death looked like through that moment, not as much. Yeah. Once Nilsen went out to the beach at Inveralki. Okay, I'm just going to say I don't know how to pronounce, like, anything.
It's okay.
Once we get to London, I'll be able to pronounce things a little better because, like, my friend Kat, like, gave me a good schooling on how, like, Londoners pronounce things very strangely. Right. But I don't understand Scotland. I am so sorry. Anyway, so he went out to the beach at Inveralki in 1954 or 1955. He doesn't quite know. And became submerged beneath the water and was almost dragged to sea. He said he gasped for air, which wasn't there, and believed that his grandfather was about to arrive and pull him out and save him. Oh, jeez. And he experienced a sense of tranquility, which a lot of people actually apparently experience when they're drowning. Mm-hmm. It's like peaceful. Right. If you lose oxygen in your brain. His life was then saved by this other person. Also important, Nilsen discovered in puberty that he was gay. It's important that, like, Nilsen is like, you do have to understand that, like, a lot of his stuff was sexually motivated, and he is, like, targeting specifically men. Right. But he was initially shocked and shamed by his revelation that he was gay. Many of the boys whom he was attracted to looked like his younger sister Sophia. So this is actually really sad and trigger warning to anyone that might feel uncomfortable with this. He once sexually fondled and molested her, believing he only liked boys because he secretly just really was attracted to his sister. That didn't turn out to be true. He apparently was also fondled by an older youth at one point and did not find the experience unpleasant. One time he also caressed and fondled the body of his older brother as he slept. Because of this, was like, my brother is gay. And started using derogatory terms like hen, which means girl, in reference to Dennis. Okay. So, skipping some time. At age 14, Dennis joins the Army Cadet Forces. Okay. Dennis, like, did pretty well in school, above average. He liked history and art, disliked sports. He worked in a factory for 3 weeks, didn't like it, and then he trained as a chef. He passed his entrance exams and received a notice that he was to enlist for 9 years service in September 1961. He described his 3 years of training at Aldershot as the happiest of his life. He liked to take part in parades and to travel, and he also, like, had a lot of sexual awakenings during this time, but he mostly hid his sexual feelings from his colleagues. He, like, never showered in front of them. In fact, he took, like, baths so he could, like, also masturbate, like, comfortably. So, yeah. He also became quite a drinker throughout this time, which is kind of important. Because we'll get there. Anyway. Okay. He drank in excess to ease his shyness, apparently. He was very uncomfortable in social situations. Yeah.
I mean, I can understand that. Yeah. And then if you're in social circumstances enough that you're that uncomfortable, I can
Some relate. People, like, that's a normal thing. Yeah. Like, it's not good, but, like, yeah, normal people
Well, I mean, whenever I go to weddings, I almost always get like a glass or two of champagne because I get so stressed out. Because you're just like... in social circumstances, but
if I don't know anyone at something, I'm always just like, I need like 3 glasses of wine. Like, I can't be here.
So, yes, uncomfortable social situations and drinking.
Okay. On one occasion, Nilsen and a German youth actually drank themselves like real silly. Real silly. Yeah, real silly until they were incapacitated. Neither of them actually did engage in any sexual activity with the other. They were perfectly fine. But this incident became an inspiration for Nilsen's fantasies. He liked the idea of a sexual partner, specifically a young, slender man. A
young slender man.
Picture this. You're in the woods.
An adolescent. Where are you going with that? Continue.
You're in the woods. You're fully naked. You're just ready. You deliver yourself. You call out, Slenderman, come. And then a tall, tall, lanky son of a gun walks through the woods. You can't even see his face. You're at level exactly with his belly button. And he comes to you, arms, and he goes like this.
And then all of his arms.
He propositions himself to you. And then, in what Dennis Nilsen would describe as a fantasy, he lays down drunk.
Where I thought you were going with that, I thought you were going to pull an actual Cannibal Shia LaBeouf for a second. Because you were like, imagine this, you're in the woods and you turn around and I thought you were going to say it's him. Actual Cannibal Shia LaBeouf.
Slenderman.
I thought that's where you were going.
Actual cannibal. Slenderman.
Adolescent Slenderman.
Adolescent Slenderman. So
Anyway,
Nilsen really liked his...
Can we name this episode Adolescent Slenderman? Dennis Nilsen and the Adolescent Slenderman.
So he really liked kids that were... Kids. No, he didn't like kids. Let's separate things. He really liked young men who were completely passive.
Mitsuha?
Young lady!
Mitsuha!
Young lady!
Ma'am?
Excuse me. What is she doing? I'm not
There's
gonna get
an
up.
empty box over here. Can I help you? Are you having a time? Okay. Okay. What were we even talking about?
Loony. Anyway.
Loony.
Young boys. He likes young men, slender men that are passive. So he liked his men slender and he liked them passive. So he also liked the idea of having his own prone baddie sexually interfered with, and he often would like weirdly make suggestions for this. He'd be like, hey guys, how would it be if I was drunk and you did something?
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But like casually, very slyly.
And also, whenever you find a nice partner and you can do some role play.
He wanted that.
Okay.
So I will
No
say
one would give it
this
to him.
eventually turns into he wanted a partner who was dead. He thought that was like the pinnacle of like passiveness, like giving yourself over to someone.
Okay.
Okay.
I say okay as I don't understand, but...
So in April 1973, he was posted in Williston Green. He started frequenting gay bars and had casual affairs with men and was drinking alone a lot. He missed a lot of the comradeship of the army. He found all of these encounters that he had in Williston Green soul-destroying and longed for a real relationship. In August, following a failed relationship, Nilsen believed his personal lifestyle was at odds with his professional life, and in December, Nilsen resigned from the police force. In May 1974, he found work as a civil servant. At his workplace, Nilsen was known to be a quiet, conscientious employee who was active in the trade union movement. In 1979, he was appointed acting executive officer, and then he moved to Kentish Town in 1982. Okay. Murder. Hello.
Murder
now
time,
we're here.
murder
Sorry
time.
for all of that backstory.
Well, it's all
understand who he is.
It's all relevant, so, like, don't be sorry.
Here's a relationship for him that does not go well. In November 1975, Nilsen encountered a 20-year-old man named David Gallican being threatened outside of a pub by two other men. Nilsen intervenes and took the youth to his room at 80 Teignmouth Road in the Cricklewood district of London. The pair seldom had intercourse, but had a kind of romantic relationship with Nilsen as breadwinner. In fact, like, Nilsen kind of, like, idealized that with himself. He really liked that.
He liked being
the breadwinner, taking care of this person.
Okay.
They started sleeping in separate beds within a year of moving to Melrose Avenue, and they each began to bring home sexual partners. So eventually the whole thing dissipates.
Okay.
Nilsen frequently berated Gallican, but he was actually never violent to him. He liked to drink and listen to prog rock music, like Genesis.
Okay.
He really liked the prog rock music. That was like his thing.
Okay.
Like during one of the murders, he made one of the victims before he knew he was going to be a victim, listen to all of Tommy by The Who.
Okay. Just in its entirety? All right.
I mean, why not?
Cool day ideas.
Honestly. Have I told you that someone made me listen to this one song by Bob Dylan?
Oh.
Listen to like one album of Bob Dylan's like in a car with him for like 2 hours.
Are you
and
serious?
I was like, this is not very interesting.
Oh my
And
god.
I was just like,
you're like, this is it.
yeah.
You should have known then.
Well,
it was
we dated and then he cheated on me with.
Hey.
I'm like, you know who he cheated on me with?
Wait, who? No way!
Yeah.
That asshole!
Yeah, no.
Oh, fuck him!
No, he like asked him out and we were kind of dating, and then he made me listen to all of Bob Dylan. And I got really upset about it. And then I was seeing him, and then he cheated on me.
I hope that they see
I
this
just thought
and
he
be
was
like,
hot
"You're an
because he had
asshole."
good glasses.
What
Okay.
were we talking about?
So, anyway.
We were talking
Dennis.
about Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan.
Genesis.
Yes.
Dennis. Okay.
Okay. And The
Okay.
Who. Tommy.
Okay.
Playing it all. Okay. Between 1978 and 1983, Nilsen killed a minimum of 12 men and boys and attempted to kill 7 others. Drop that bomb for you. Nilsen prayed...
Times they are changing. Where did this come from? I was singing Bob Dylan because we were talking about Bob Dylan.
No, I moved on.
You were like, I don't want to think about that.
I don't like Bob Dylan anymore.
Okay,
Which sucks because one of my favorite songs is a Bob Dylan song.
Really? But you just can't
lessons keep you away.
But you just can't
May
listen to
wishes
it.
all come true. Anyway, so Nilsen preyed largely on homeless or homosexual men, and many were heterosexual men actually that he met in bars or on public transport or outside of his own home in one instance. Nilsen lured his victims using alcohol or with promise of shelter. This is his pattern, he would give his victims food and alcohol, then strangle them, usually with a ligature, until they were dead or unconscious. If the victims survived, Nilsen drowned them in his bathtub, his sink, or using a bucket of water before observing a ritual in which he bathed, clothed, and retained the bodies inside his home for several weeks or occasionally months before he dismembered them. He would sometimes burn the victims in a bonfire when he was finished with them. Prior to the victim's dismemberment, Nilsen removed their internal organs, which he disposed of either beside a fence, behind his flat, or close to Gladstone Park. He would sometimes retain the bodies in his flat, with the flesh and smaller bones flushed down the lavatory, which we'll get back to. Nilsen would often masturbate while he looked at the nude bodies and claimed to have engaged in sexual acts with 6 of his victims' bodies. But he said he never penetrated them, and that makes all the difference, right? Whatever. More on this later. I really liked that part where he was like, but I never penetrated them. And it's like...
That doesn't
You're
make
still...
it okay, Dennis.
You're still... You're still assaulting a corpse.
I mean, well,
in a real person's
and also,
body.
You're assaulting a corpse. Keyword corpse. So there's a problem. Why there's a corpse in the first place?
Them?
So it's like there's a lot of problems leading up to you not being able to penetrate a corpse or not
He said they
penetrating
were.
a corpse.
I'll get to it, but he said they were too pure to be penetrated. But if you're confused. It's important to note that Nilsen had 2 main addresses of murder. First address and first victim. This is a long case. This is in my notes. This is a long case. I am so sorry.
I'm not.
So, the first location, so we're finally getting murder, is 195 Melrose Avenue. The first victim is 14-year-old Stephen Dean Holmes. Holmes met Nilsen at the Cricklewood Arms pub, where Holmes tried to purchase alcohol, but was rejected because he wasn't 18. Nilsen had been drinking heavily alone and then left his flat to get company. He invited the youth to his house to drink alcohol with him, believing the kid to be 17. I have trouble believing that based on this photo, but sure,
He looks
okay.
a baby.
He looks 14.
Yeah.
Like, fine. All right. That's not the biggest problem here. They continued to drink and eventually crawled into bed together to sleep. Nilsen woke up at dawn and realized that his new friend had to leave. But Nilsen did not want to be abandoned. So he took his tie and slipped it around his victim's neck and strangled the young boy. The boy woke up immediately and struggled off the bed onto the floor. Nilsen then tightened his grip around his neck. The victim pushed himself to his feet with Nilsen on top of him along the carpet, and eventually he grew limp and totally gave up. Nilsen relaxed, but then he was like, this kid's still actually alive. So he goes into the kitchen, he fills up a plastic bucket of water, and he drowns the kid in the bucket of water. I took this from Murderpedia, but I thought this was such an interesting way of putting it and really sets the scene. But they wrote it as, Stephen did not struggle anymore, although breath caused water to splash across the carpet. The bubbles and splashing water eventually stopped. Stephen was kept under Nilsen's floorboard. The reason I like that previous thing is like the thought of the water for me, like coming up in bursts, and he's not even struggling. It's just like the lot. It's so sad.
Right.
Stephen was kept under Nilsen's floorboard. He remained there for 7.5 months until Nilsen took him out and burned him in a bonfire. He added rubber to the fire to mask the smell of burning flesh and raked the ashes into the ground.
Oh my God.
Victim 2, which we don't have a photo of. Nearly a year after the first murder was the attempted murder of Andrew Ho. I'm saying victim because these people were terrorized, so it doesn't matter if they were murdered. These people were terrorized. Nilsen met Ho at St. Martin Lane's pub, and Nilsen promised Ho sex. Ho was a young Chinese student who went home with Nilsen in August of 1979. The young man wanted to try some bondage play, but Nilsen, weirdly, was not into it, considering other aspects of him, but fine, okay. But he put a tie around the...
He draws his line somewhere.
But then he still puts a tie around the guy's neck, and then he goes, you're playing a dangerous game. And then Ho was like, okay, bye. Bails the fuck out and was like, okay, I'm gonna tell the police what just happened, because that was a lot. But no charges were ever brought.
Why did I see that coming?
And it keeps happening. Okay.
It's like, oh my God, why is it like Dean Coral over again where like this shit is just, oh my God.
Because the 70s were a ride.
Oh, it's during kind of the same time, a little bit after.
Yeah, it's
Coral,
basically
but still.
2 years later.
Why don't people fucking do shit? Why don't they do shit? Okay, continue. Sorry.
Okay. So, victim 3 is Kenneth Ockenden. Who's that guy? He was a Canadian and was visiting English relatives. Kenneth met Nilsen at lunch at a pub on December 3rd, 1979. The couple drank together for several hours, and because Nilsen heard he was a tourist, like visiting, he was like, let me show you some spots. So he took him on a tour of London, and then Kenneth eventually ended up at Nilsen's flat. The pair actually like really got on, and Nilsen felt desperate at the thought that this Canadian would be flying home the next day. So, to keep him from leaving, Nilsen strangled Ockenden with an electrical cord from some headphones. Nilsen relegated Ockenden to the space beneath the floorboards. He took him out several times so that they could sit together and watch television. Kenneth fed Nilsen's urge for 5 months, and then he eventually targeted another person. But we also know that Nilsen took many photos of Kenneth using a Polaroid camera.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Do you think, like, I mean, he was super lonely then, Dennis was.
So that's, like, one of the big things, is he gets compared to Jeffrey Dahmer because the idea of loneliness gets brought up a lot. Where people kind of, I think, have a lot of sympathy for Jeffrey Dahmer, which I think is kind of silly because many people are lonely and mentally ill but don't go to the extent of killing people.
Yeah. I like to kind of try to think into why this happened, and if things were different, it maybe couldn't have happened. At the same time, I don't have any sympathy for them.
My thing is, I'm not sure if it couldn't have happened. Like, I think someone with this kind of psychopathy. Well, he's not a psychopath and he's not a sociopath, but someone with this kind of psychology.
But it makes me wonder, and I don't know, but it just makes me wonder if earlier on he had found someone he could be in a relationship with him who could appease him sexually in a submissive way, that maybe this wouldn't have happened.
I don't know,
you know what I mean?
I think he wanted such a submission that was
literally death,
which was also what Jeffrey Dahmer wanted. He wanted a living zombie to like
Okay.
appease his sexual desires. And it's also like, I mean, Dennis Nilsen wasn't like a great person to be around. He was like he berated his former lover like constantly. I don't think he was a lot of fun.
Okay.
Like even dead bodies weren't enough for
Yeah.
him. He had to keep killing. So like one wasn't enough. He had to keep
Yeah.
feeding it.
You're right.
Victim number 4, Martin Duffy. Martin was 16 years old and was murdered sometime in May of 1980. Martin was homeless, and he accepted Nilsen's invitation to spend the night. After 2 beers, Duffy went to bed, and Nilsen climbed on top of him, strangled him. He then carried Duffy into the kitchen, drowned him by pushing his head into a sink full of water. Then he took him to the bathtub and bathed him and did the essential other rituals. Duffy lived in the cupboard.
Why is that so funny? It's just because you said it, and then you're like, why did I say it? He had him...
He existed. He was placed in the cupboard for 2 full weeks and then was placed under the floorboards.
Did he do any kind of preserving or anything?
No.
So did it just smell really bad?
Yeah, and that's important. We'll get there.
Okay.
Victim 5. Okay. This is William Billy Sutherland. He was 27 years old. Sometime in August 1980, Sutherland was unfortunate enough to meet Nilsen. Sutherland was a sex worker, and Nilsen apparently did not want to take him home, but Sutherland followed Nilsen after they went bar hopping one night. Nilsen apparently barely recalls strangling him and finding his body in his home the next morning, which sounds fucking bogus to me, but sure.
But, I mean,
Okay.
if he was to the point of being, like, literally just so drunk that he did this in his drunken state,
That's not better.
that's not better at all.
Okay, so victim 6, we have Douglas Stewart. So he
honey.
survives. He survives.
Okay, good.
Douglas said that Nilsen attacked him sometime in August of 1980. He had fallen asleep in the armchair, waking to find his feet tied, and Nilsen placing a tie around his neck. Super casual.
Cash.
I love it when people do that. I'm like, wow, am I about to eat some food?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Cool. Am I
Oh,
going
feed
to a
me.
nice business meeting?
Thanks.
Okay. Douglas fought back, knocking Nilsen over, and then Nilsen demands he leave. Same. Okay. Okay. He called the police. Douglas calls the police to 195 Melrose Place on August 11, 1980, around 4 a.m. But the police noticed Douglas had been drinking, so they blow him off. They assume that this is just a homosexual encounter. The police knock on the door anyway, and Nilsen acts surprised at their allegations. So the police make a report, but Stewart fails to follow up as required, so they just let it go. Between November 1980 and May 1981, Nilsen killed 7 men who were never identified. We have information surrounding their death because Dennis talks about them. It's so much information. I didn't feel like I had time for one video to go into them. It's just so many people.
Yeah.
So I'm keeping it to the ones that are identifiable, and also we have a lot more information about.
Yeah.
But
That's still 7 men unidentified, which is so heartbreaking, but it's such a long story, so I understand.
yeah, so I cut them, but please do your research on them, and I do want to pay homage to them as well. I wish
we had the time to go into that.
Yeah, it sucks, and I wish we knew their names, which cases like this always make me very sad.
Yes.
That there are people whose families don't know that their loved one is even dead.
Watch our Dean Coral video. We go all into that. Okay. It's fine.
Victim 7. And last
7.
victim known at Melrose. Malcolm Barlow was a 24-year-old orphan with some severe mental problems and an issue with lying. Nilsen found Barlow loitering outside of his home on September 18th, 1981. Malcolm complained of weakness from epilepsy. Nilsen takes him home and calls an ambulance. Barlow is then released and then comes straight back to Nilsen's doorway and is trying to get help. Nilsen invites him in and they drink together, and then Barlow falls asleep. Nilsen's annoyed at Barlow's overall presence and doesn't really want him there, so he strangles him. He then stuffs Barlow in the cabinet underneath the kitchen sink, He sat in the flat with a half dozen other bodies awaiting disposal. Some of them Nilsen had kept in bed with him for sexual purposes for as long as a week. Having control over these men thrilled him, and the mystery of a dead body that would not respond fascinated him. I stole that from Murderpedia. It's good writing. Now we move to 23 Kline Gardens, a place I have been. So to explain what this is it essentially is a duplex building. So that
you can find lots of pictures of it.
Yeah,
actually.
but here's my actual video I took because I took a trip. Ha ha ha. Anyway, so at Kline Gardens, we have Paul Nobbs, who's a 25-year-old man. This is known victim 8.
Okay.
On November 23rd, 1981, Nilsen, this is Nilsen's 36th birthday. He took a happy fucking birthday, you fuck. He took a 19-year-old gay student, Paul, back home with him, and they drank together. They went to bed together, and Nobbs woke up at 2:30 a.m. with a pretty bad headache. He woke again at 6 and went to the kitchen. In the mirror, he saw a deep red mark across his throat. The white of his eyes were bloodshot, and his face looked bruised. Nilsen commented that he looked awful and should see a doctor. So Paul's like, okay. So he goes to the university infirmary, and the bruises indicate that someone tried to strangle him. He declined to report the incident.
He was like, that was fucking weird, but
he was like, okay, bye. And he didn't want to talk about it because he was like very traumatized.
Right,
by the incident.
understandably.
So victim 9 is Toshimitsu Otsawa, who also survives. On New Year's Eve, 1981, neighbors of Nilsen were invited to hang out with him at his flat, but they claimed that they had other plans. Smart. Nilsen then gets really, really drunk. His neighbors hear him leave the house and then return home with someone. Then they hear a sound, lots of noise. Someone comes running down the stairs, sobbing, and runs out the front door. This man was Toshimitsu Otsawa. He told the police that Nilsen had intended to kill him and that Nilsen had approached Otsawa with a tie stretched between his hands. There was no follow-up investigation to this police report.
Have literally, this has been at least 3 boys who have been like, Dennis Nilsen fucking tried to murder me. And they're like, it's fine.
Like, the gays are weird.
That's so, it's fine. Okay.
The gays are weird, says the police. We don't know what they do. Okay. Victim 10. On March 1982, John Hallett, also known as John the Guardsman because he couldn't remember his name when he was testifying to murdering him.
Yikes.
But we find that out later through investigation, detective work. John Hallett was murdered. Nilsen and Hallett had met once in a pub and engaged in a long conversation. Then Nilsen was drinking alone one day when John walked in, recognized him. They chatted and decided to go to Nilsen's place, where after drinking a while, John got into Nilsen's bed. Nilsen tried to get him to leave, but John refused to go. Nilsen then found a length of loose upholstery strap on an armchair and used it to strangle the man.
Baby.
At one point, he feared he would be overpowered because he's like a guardsman. So he tightened his grip as John fought for control. Then he struck his head, and John soon went limp. Nilsen kept the strap on him until he was sure he was dead, and then he goes into the other room. Soon, he figures out that John is still alive. He then looped the strap around his neck again, held it for 2 or 3 minutes. However, John's heart was still beating, so Nilsen dragged him into the bathroom and drowned him. So this is sweet baby angel Carl Stoddard, who was a drag artist. So Nilsen liked to hang out with drag artist Carl Stoddard, who was 21 years old. They drank together and they went to bed. During this time, Nilsen attempted to strangle Stoddard, who woke up unable to breathe. He thought Nilsen was trying to help him, but apparently that was not the case. Nilsen carried him into the bathroom and placed him in a tub of water, submerging him several times until Stoddard begged for him to stop. Stoddard then went under and stopped struggling. Nilsen thought he was dead and carried him to the couch. Bleep, who is Nilsen's dog. Look how cute Bleep is.
Oh, Bleep, honey. Bleep. You deserve better.
But, like, Nilsen apparently was really good to us. I don't know. Like
he has a weird complex, doesn't he?
Yeah, we'll get into his, like, his psychology in a little bit. But, yeah. So Bleep then jumps up and begins to lick Star's face, aware that he's still alive. Nilsen then takes Star to bed and wrapped himself around the young man until he regained consciousness. Nilsen told Stoddard that he had gotten his throat caught in the zipper of his sleeping bag that had covered him. Stoddard attributed the experience to a bad nightmare, despite getting a checkup and learning that his condition was consistent with severe strangulation. He agreed to meet with Nilsen again, but did not keep the appointment. He also did not go to the police. So Archibald Graham Allen, his crime happened in late 1982. Nilsen makes him an omelet, and what he recalls of this death was rather odd. Nilsen says, I noticed he was sitting there, and suddenly he appeared to be asleep or unconscious with a large piece of omelet hanging out of his mouth. At that point, he thought he strangled him, but does not recall.
Oh my God.
He thought the man might have choked on his omelet. Nilsen said, if the omelet killed him, I don't know. Since an omelet does not leave red marks on someone's neck, Nilsen supposed that he was probably the one responsible.
Does he black out when he does this?
So a lot of times he's drunk.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. And his memory gets bad. I mean, also, if I think you murder like 30 people, you just start to forget.
I guess so.
They're not as important anymore.
That's gross.
You just start losing track.
Oh my God.
So, victim 13 is Steve Sinclair, who is 20 years old. This takes place on January 26, 1983. Stephen Sinclair took drugs and lawyered around Leicester Square. On January 23, 1983, some of his acquaintances saw him go off with a strange man. They went to Nilsen's home where Steve and Nilsen went to Nilsen's home where Nilsen sat and listened to music, while Sinclair shot up and then fell asleep in a chair. Nilsen went into his kitchen and found some thick string, thinking to himself, oh, Stephen, here I go again. The string was too short, so he attached it to a tie. He draped the ligature over the sleeping man's knees and poured himself a drink. Then he sat and contemplated all the pain in Stephen's life and decided to stop it for him. What a hero. He went over, made sure that Stephen was deep asleep, and then used the string and tied ligature to strangle him. Stephen struggled slightly and then went unconscious. He was Nilsen's last victim.
Oh my God.
Following his rituals with Stephen, he turned Stephen's head towards him before kissing the youth's body on the forehead and saying, good night, Stephen.
Oh my God. Was that a ritual that he did to all of them?
No, that's the one that he remembers. That one's special for some reason. As what happened with Allen, Sinclair's body was dissected with the various dismembered parts wrapped in plastic bags and stored in either a wardrobe, a tea chest.
She goes, hold my paw.
A tea chest or within a drawer located beneath the bathtub. The bags used to seal Sinclair's remains were sealed with crepe bandages previously found on Sinclair's wrist. Apparently, he used to self-harm.
Okay.
Nilsen would attempt to dispose of the flesh, internal organs, and smaller bones of these victims by flushing their dissected remains down his toilet. He also boiled the heads, hands, and feet to remove the flesh off these sections of bodies. This was also seen in Melrose Avenue. On February 4th, 1983, Nilsen wrote a letter of complaint to estate agents complaining that the drains at Cranley Gardens were blocked, and that the situation for both himself and the other tenants was intolerable. Wonder how they got blocked, Dennis.
Dumbass.
Anyway, he then refused to allow an acquaintance to enter his apartment because he was legit dismembering Steve Sinclair in his kitchen right when the acquaintance knocked on the door.
Oh my God.
So he was like, no, you can't come in. To wrap this up, how does this bullshit get discovered? Well, they were first discovered by a Dino Rod employee, Michael Catran, who responded to the complaints of Nilsen and the other tenants. Opening a drain cover at the side of the house, Catran discovered flesh-like substances on the drain. Upon hearing Catran explain how similar the substance was in appearance to human flesh, how does Catran know what human flesh looks like? A question.
First of all.
But then, Nilsen replies, well, it looks to me like someone has been flushing down their Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Dennis, you absolute fucking dumbass. You piece of shit.
My literal notes just say, okay, Dennis.
Okay, Dennis. Okay, bye, Denny.
So, the remains were then taken to the mortuary at Hornsey, where a pathologist, Professor David Bowen, advised the police that the remains were definitely human, and one bore a ligature mark around the neck. The police request to enter Nilsen's flat, where they immediately are like, it smells like human flesh. They check his drains, and Nilsen feigns shock and bewilderment. What flesh? What?
What flesh? Where? What smell of actual death?
What?
I don't know what you're talking. It's Kentucky Fried Chicken.
It's all just American garbage food. It all smells
With these dumbass police, I'd be like, you right.
No, they're actually very smart. They tell him to cut the shit. So Nilsen responds,
I didn't
So
mean
he
to offend. I didn't mean to offend the dumbass English police, but also 3-4 boys had come to him saying Dennis Nilsen is fucking sketchy as fuck, and they didn't do anything. So that's all I'm saying.
You're right.
Continue.
So he's feigning shock and bewilderment, and the police are like, "Where the fuck is the body? Like, we know there's a body.
Yeah.
What the fuck?" So Nilsen responds calmly, telling them that the remainder of the body could be found in 2 plastic bags in a nearby wardrobe. The officers did not open the cupboard, but asked if there were any other bodies. Nilsen replied, "It's a long story." It goes back a long time.
I mean, I guess that's a good way to be like, okay, you got me. It's a long story.
It's a long story.
I guess you're wondering how I got here.
Record scratch. Thousands of bodies around me. Guess you wondered how I got here.
Oh, Dennis. His new sitcom, Oh, Dennis.
Dennis. It's a dead body. That's so Dennis. Necrophilia, I can see.
That's so Dennis.
What? That's me.
It's a long story.
Anyway, it's a long story. It goes back a long time. I'll tell you everything. I want to get it off my chest, but not here. At the police station.
Okay.
He was then arrested and cautioned on suspicion of murder. He admitted that the remains probably belonged to about 15 or 16 people since 1978.
He's so weird, isn't he?
He's very matter of fact. It's
Wow.
actually very weird.
It reminds me a little bit of Ed Kemper.
I can see that.
Because he's just like, yep,
Where it's almost more manipulative in a way, because he's like, yeah, sure, I did it.
And that's that. Okay.
Nilsen liked to shave. This is also part of his methodology and ritual with the victims. He liked to shave his victims and apply makeup to hide blemishes. He wanted his victims to look physically ideal. So the victims were apparently too perfect and beautiful for the pathetic ritual of commonplace sex. So he claimed that he never actually did have sex with them because they were too perfect and beautiful. So when asked if Nilsen felt any remorse for his crimes, Nilsen replied, "I wished I could stop, but I couldn't." Yeah, you could. "I had no other thrill or happiness." He worshipped the art and the act of death. So he was tried for the murder of Stephen Sinclair and was transferred to Brixton Prison, which is the prison I went to.
Oh, that's right. The one that you accidentally did?
Yeah.
Okay, well, go watch our video about Caitlin's travels in London, and you can see, you can hear her story.
I went to the HMP Brixton.
On accident.
On accident, thinking it was the Clink.
It wasn't.
So it kind of was, but wasn't. Yeah, I went to where Dennis Nilsen was held. It's
so
a
go watch
lovely
that.
prison.
It's a nice little...
Mick Jagger was held there. So were 2 of the Misfits. It's a good time.
Good time.
So, Nilsen entered a plea of not guilty. Haha, okay. When he finally did go to trial, Nilsen was decided to be sane, in full control of his actions, and had killed with premeditation. Nilsen was diagnosed as having a borderline false self as if pseudo-normal narcissistic personality disorder with occasional outbreaks of schizoid disturbances that Nilsen managed to mainly keep at bay. The jury retired to consider their verdict on November 3rd, 1983. The following day, the jury returned with a majority verdict of guilty upon 6 counts of murder and 1 attempted murder, with a unanimous verdict of guilty in relation to the attempted murder of Paul Nobbs. The judge sentenced Nilsen to life imprisonment with a recommendation that he serve at least 25 years. And he died in prison, as I said before. So I wrote this, but I think it's really important to note this is such an intro course to him. There is so much more.
Yeah.
And there are like legitimate studies about Dennis Nilsen and his psychology, and also trying to just kind of figure him out.
I mean, I have so many questions already.
Well, and I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Yeah.
Like, I have done not enough research to be totally educated on this.
But even so, you had like 10 pages.
I have 11 pages of research on this. So all of that to say, there's so much information about him out there. I skimmed the surface. I did my best to like condense it into like palatable chunks, but it's a lot. So
he's very interesting. He's
fascinating.
I mean, nothing that we haven't already said, but in the way of like Jeffrey Dahmer, like he doesn't seem malicious per se. And
there's just something
you know,
wrong.
I mean, there's something obviously wrong, and it's not good, but it's not like ill intent. It's just a weird kind of loneliness and sexualization.
And it's also extreme selfishness where
Yeah.
you're like, I think that my needs as a human being trump the needs of other people to be alive.
Literally
Or, like,
alive, yeah.
So I think there is kind of, I mean, like, even if you saw in the medical notes, like, from doctors used by the DA, not that they don't call it the DA, but basically the prosecution in London used, like, evidence that he had, like, borderline personality, but they never said he was a psychopath or a sociopath.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to keep in mind, that this is a totally different kind of monster that comes from a totally different kind of energy. Like, it's not...
That's what makes him so interesting.
Yeah, he's not trying to outsmart anyone. Because, like, you can even tell he's so point blank with the cops. He's not trying to outsmart anyone.
Yeah.
He's just doing this.
He's not a Ted Bundy or a Zodiac killer. Like, he's he's a Dennis Nilsen. He's his own thing.
Yeah,
which is really weird.
He's a creep.
Yeah.
He's a creepier one, though, to me. Like, there's something way creepier about being so lonely. I don't know.
And just being so obsessed with, like, your own sexuality and selfishness and, like, being so detached from that part of your humanity and death that it's like,
well, and I found I found him such a weird rabbit hole to go down. Easier than Dean Coral by quite a bit, but in that same kind of, like, I couldn't understand it sort of realm, where I just kind of spent a lot of time, like, grasping for how I felt about things. And I was just like, okay, where is the line where sympathy crosses over to where it's inappropriate?
Yeah.
I was also watching, there's this really cool Netflix docu-series going on right now that has to do with, like, morbid tourism, essentially.
Okay.
And one of them is that people go to Jeffrey Dahmer's hometown in Milwaukee.
They'll, like, collect rocks and stuff.
Yeah, and they, like, obsess over him. And they feel this weird connection to him. And I'm like, where is the line between I understand why maybe you felt lonely and maybe it caused you to do some horrible, unforgivable things that are still horrible and unforgivable. But I can maybe understand it because you're not a sociopath or a psychopath.
Yeah.
But where does that line cross? Where you're someone that's interested in true crime. We've talked about this.
Yeah.
But where you're interested in true crime and you're interested in these psychologies and you maybe even have a little sympathy to where you're obsessed and in love with a serial killer or a murderer just in general. Like, where does that happen?
I have just enough sympathy. Not, like, sympathy. I don't want to call it sympathy, but, like, I want to understand what put them in these positions.
Well, it's like, I think you can have sympathy for the devil, but, like, it doesn't mean that you, like...
But not in the way that I, like, sexualize them or, like, oh, my God, I see people calling, like, oh, poor baby, literally to Ted Bundy, and I'm like,
oh, God.
They're like, oh, his smile. I'm like...
I also
That's a different kind of something.
love when women have crushes on Jeffrey Dahmer because I'm like, he was gay as fuck.
I hate it all.
Good luck getting the ghost of Jeffrey Dahmer to want to have sex with
literally,
you,
right?
Dumbass. Like,
it's so strange to me. It's fine.
This just brings up so many.
I know.
Anyway, I think that was a good one, and
I enjoyed that. You killed it.
We're bringing it back.
Okay, bye guys. Oh wait, we have to do the Instagram.
Oh, yes. Hi. So, if you liked what we had to offer, or even if you didn't, because I don't really care, you should like us on Instagram. Sorry, follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Reddit. We have all the things. Just look below for our social media. Also, make sure to like, rate, subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon, and leave a comment down below about how your day was.
How was your day?
How was your day? Are you okay?
It's been a long week, huh?
I'm tired.
I'm tired. I hope you had a good week, though. It's Tuesday when we're recording this. It's Friday when you're
seeing this. And it's been a long week. But you know what? You're almost done. It's noon Central Time. You're making it through.
We believe in you. We do.
Okay.
We believe in you.
Bye.